Hello, everybody. Let's talk about the respiratory system, whose purpose it is to supply the body with oxygen while removing carbon dioxide. Inhalation works by having the diaphragm muscle contract, which pulls the lungs down. As the space inside the lungs expands, the pressure becomes lower. Since the pressure outside the body is higher than the pressure inside the lungs, air will flow from outside the body into the lungs. Gas is exchanged with the new air that flows into the lungs, causing oxygen to enter the bloodstream and carbon dioxide to leave the bloodstream. Then exhalation occurs, where the diaphragm relaxes. This causes the volume in the lungs to decrease, which increases the pressure in the lungs. Then the air inside the lungs is higher pressure than the air outside the body, which will cause the air to flow from inside the lungs to outside the lungs. And this will normalize the pressure between the air inside and outside the lungs. Then the cycle will repeat. Now let's go into more detail on the different parts of the respiratory system. The respiratory system starts with the nasal and oral cavities. Both allow airflow into the body, but the nasal cavity does a better job at filtering and warming the air first. In the nasal cavity, there are nasal conchae. These are bony grooves that increase the surface area of the nasal cavity, which allows better warming and humidification of the air. Above the nasal cavity are the frontal and sphenoid sinuses. These produce mucus which lines the nasal cavity, preventing it from drying out and catching small contaminants. The pharynx is a section between the nasal cavity and the oral cavities, often referred to as the throat. It acts as a passageway for air to flow through. Then there's the larynx, sometimes called the voice box. It holds the vocal cords, the epiglottis, and it provides passageway for airflow. The epiglottis is a small flap in the larynx that sits beside the esophagus. It covers the respiratory tract when swallowing so that food and water don't enter the respiratory tract. The vocal cords are these folds of muscles that contract, and that causes the air to flow differently inside them, which results in sound being made. And this is how humans talk and make sound. Now, let's take a look at the lower respiratory tract. At the bottom of the lungs lies the diaphragm. It's the muscle that causes the lungs to expand by pulling the lungs down. This causes pressure differences between the lungs and the outside air, which creates airflow, known as breathing. The rib cage is a set of 24 bones, or 12 bones on each side, that provides structure and stability, and it protects the organs inside of it. The intercostal muscles connect to the ribs, and they aid in breathing by moving the chest wall when contracting, which changes the volume of the lungs similar to how the diaphragm functions. However, it should be noted that the diaphragm is still considered the main muscle used in breathing. Now let's look at the respiratory tract that's inside of the rib cage. The lungs are organs that take in and expel air so that gases can be exchanged within the blood. You might notice on this diagram that the right lung is on the left side of the screen and that the left lung is on the right side of the screen. That's because we label the sides according to the perspective of the person in the diagram, meaning that if you were this person in the diagram, this would be your right lung and then this would be your left lung. This left lung is a little bit different in shape from the right lung, in that there's this little section carved out here towards the middle bottom part, and that's because the heart lies in this area, so it needs space for the heart to fit there. The trachea connects the lungs to the larynx and allows airflow between them. The bronchus are these large tubes that connect the inside of the lungs to the trachea, and branching off the bronchus are small air tubes called bronchioles. At the end of the bronchioles are tiny air sacs called alveoli, where gas exchange occurs. And now we can take a closer look at the alveoli. Most of the respiratory tract is lined with a mucous membrane that will secrete mucus, and mucus is just a slimy substance that traps contaminants, moisturizes, and lubricates most of the respiratory tract. At the end of the respiratory tract are alveoli, or these spaces where blood exchanges gas with the air in the lungs. These alveoli are grouped together in what is called alveolar sacs. Surrounding the alveoli are capillary beds, where there are small blood vessels that assist in the process of exchanging gases between the blood and air. The pulmonary artery brings the deoxygenated blood into the lungs so that it can get rid of carbon dioxide waste and pick up fresh oxygen. Then the freshly oxygenated blood is brought back to the heart by the pulmonary vein. And this is the basic overview of how the respiratory system works.